Happy Sunday. It's Kris from Socially Awkward Stitching Society, and I'm back with another episode in our series Machine Embroidery 101. My husband watched the last one and he said I needed to smile more. He did not say, and this is why he's still safe, he did not say I'd be prettier if I smiled. So I will try to be a little more relaxed in myself, is what he said I needed to do. I asked him if he was sure I really should be myself. That might be a little overwhelming. So fabric is called substrate by professional embroiderers. We're going to call it fabric. And depending on the weave of that fabric and the weight of that fabric, you can use denser designs, or sometimes you're going to have to use a lighter design. It also determines what kind of stabilization you're going to want to use. The size and density of your design, and if you've got a high stitch count design, where those stitches are they all concentrated in one area, that's going to determine what you can get away with in terms of the lightness of your fabric. When these three things are not matched, that's when you're going to get your puckers, and it happens to everybody. Sometimes I just decide it's okay if it's a little puckered. It's also where you're going to get really rigid, bulletproof embroidery that is uncomfortable to wear. There's a fourth thing you need to think about as well, and that's your hoop. This is pretty typical of a home machine embroidery hoop. It's a round cornered rectangle. A lot of commercial machines have round hoops. The reason for that is that a round hoop is going to hold the cloth the same way all the way around that circle. But we like these square hoops because they give us more room, right? The problem with them is the tight plate, where the fabric is held the tightest is going to be in the corners. Here, I don't know that I can get you have you see that, but if you take one of your hoops, you're going to find it's tight here, and you can actually move this back and forth here. That also allows the fabric to migrate. When it's getting punched on, right, it's getting punched on like this, it can cause the fabric to migrate a little bit and get sloppy, and that can cause some stitching problems as well. The other trouble spot with home hoops is this right here. These are on a different part of the hoop depending on your machine, but this is a spot where things are not held tightly. So if you've got a lot of density in this corner, which has happened to me before in your design, that can often create a little buckle right down there. There are some things you can do to help with this. Some people hoop that non-skid stuff that you put inside drawers. They cut out the center and they hoop it with their fabric in here to help hold the fabric. Janome comes with little strips that are sticky that do that. Basically help with that same issue. I don't know if other machines come with this, but my Janome has these little clamps. They don't work very well for loose things, for thin things, like when I've just got stabilizer in there and in the hoop, but they do work pretty well if I'm using a sandwich of, decent stabilizer and a decent weight fabric. You can also use pins to kind of hook the fabric, and where the fabric might be tempted to slide around in that space, the pin will help keep it where it belongs. So those are some tricks with your hoops, but just know that some of the things that we encounter as home embroiderers are because our hoops are not the same, and they've got some built-in weaknesses that the wrong design can really interact with and cause problems. So the other thing to remember is that the bigger your hoop, the more likelihood you're going to have of flagging. So you've got your fabric held pretty tightly all around the edges, but if you've got a bigger hoop, you're going to see that middle part have a little more, no matter how tight you hoop it, seems to have a little bit more movement up and down. And that can cause skip stitches, and it can cause registration errors. So I always try to work in the, if I'm doing multiples, of course I'm going to use a big hoop, right? but I don't put on my big hoop if I can put on the next smaller one, because I'm going to get better results with a hoop that fits this design size. So the first thing to think about when you're looking at a design and you're wanting to stitch it is, what is the stitch count? Now, some designs that have a lot of text in them, let me grab one. This is one of my designs. It's going to be backwards to you, but it's "Home is where those fuckers ain't." And this design has a pretty high stitch count. There's a couple of reasons for that. One reason is it's got a lot of satin text, and that really makes the stitch count climb quickly. It also has some fairly dense spots right in the centers of the flowers, but actually I used a fairly light fill on the petals to try to help ameliorate that. So just because something has a high stitch count doesn't mean you're going to have issues with it, but it is something that can get your attention to make you think about, how am I going to stabilize this? If you have a high stitch count and big chunks of fill, that's a design that's maybe going to be problematic. I stitched out a design, this was before I was a digitizer, for a friend of mine, and I'll show you the fabric later that I stitched it on, and it was an absolute cluster. And it was because even though I did everything I could, the design was so dense, and this was from a really good digitizer usually, right? But it was so dense, and the fabric I was using it on was so soft that it cupped and pulled and had registration errors, and it took me multiple attempts to get this passable. So look for those big chunky designs. Those are the ones you're going to need to be really careful on. So the higher the stitch count, and the more those stitches are concentrated in one area, the more stable you need your stabilizer and your fabric to be. So usually that's going to call for a cutaway stabilizer, and it could even call for a heavyweight cutaway stabilizer. I tend to use cutaway that ranges from 2.5 to 3.0 ounces is how they often measure how heavy they are. And those work for most of the things that I'm doing. It also is going to benefit if you have that heavy design from a stable fabric, and that doesn't necessarily mean a heavier weight. We'll talk about that in a minute, but the fabric weave is important too. If you've got a lighter, lower stitch count design, say kind of a sketch thing with sketch fills or mostly done with outlining, then you can get away with less stabilization and with lighter, less stable fabrics. Cutaway or tearaway. I'm going to tell you what I do. There are lots of opinions out there. When I'm deciding which stabilizer I'm going to use, in addition to thinking about the fabric and how much support it's going to need, and thinking about the design and how dense it is, I'm going to consider the ultimate use of the embroidered item. If it's something that's going to get washed a lot, if it's something that's going to a kid that's going to get washed a lot and have be run through hot water washes and dryer and all of that, I'm absolutely going to use a cutaway. There's a phrase, if you wear it, don't tear it, because those repeated washings will break down a tearaway, and then you lose the support that you had, and the design gets all wonky later. If it's a gift, you might not be there to see that happen, but we really want the things that we make for people to stay good for them. So cutaway for wearable and frequently laundered items. Wash away is something a lot of people like to use, like on the backs of towels and things. Remember that that is going to wash away, and towels get washed a lot. Sometimes wash away, especially if it's a bit of a dense design, once all that support's gone, it's going to look really bad. So I encourage you, as you're making things, use them yourself so you can see what happens to your stabilizer after it sees normal use. And that will help guide you when you're ready to do one for a gift or for sale. One of the tricks that I use when I have a really dense design is I will hoop a heavyweight cutaway like a 3.0 or higher ounce. And then if I've got either parts of the design or that are really dense, or I'm just concerned that's not going to be enough, I take a sheet or two of tearaway and I slip it under the hoop. That will add a little more stabilization without adding more rigidity, and so and you can tear away on the outside, right? So that's a good way to sort of cheat and get a little bit more stabilization without getting more of the, this has a sheet of plywood feel, right? Has a sheet of plywood in it feel. So that's a little trick that I use sometimes. All right, let's talk about some fabric. I do not have a shortage of fabric, right? But this is my quilting stuff. I have a couple of wovens that I use on a regular basis. Most of the time when I'm stitching, unless it's on a garment, I am using a twill, and I have a polyester twill that's super cheap and super great, or a duck canvas, which is a plain weave. So in a plain weave, I don't know if I can show you with my hands here. A plain weave goes like that. Something like that, right? So you've got threads that go this way and threads that go this way, and the threads intersect every thread. A plain weave actually doesn't hold stitches quite as well as what's called a twill weave. This is why denim is so wonderful and gives us such a crisp embroidered piece, is because that twill weave just has a way of holding those stitches regardless of how dense or how heavy the fabric is. So let me show you. This is the twill that I use the most. I test stitch on this. I test stitch on it with dark threads so I can see if I've got coverage issues. But it's a stable fabric, but it's also fairly lightweight, and it's super cheap. This is Fabric Warehouse, I believe. I'll put the link in the description. $3.99 a yard. So it's really good for busting out test stitches if you're either a digitizer or you like to stitch something out before you stitch it on something special. I don't know if you'll be able to see this on the camera, but I'm going to hold it up here and show you that you can identify a twill by the diagonal lines in it. Okay? And you're going to see the same thing on denim. I think I have a piece of denim here. Yes, I do. This one. Okay. This will actually might be easier to see. So this is denim, which also has that twill going on, right? These hold stitches really well and you get a much crisper edge. Let me show you what I mean. All right. You are enough. There's your affirmation for today. If I hold these up together, this one's got a little buckle in it where I don't think I hooped it quite right, but I'm going to still hold it up for you to see. If you look closely at the edges there, I don't know if this is going to focus right. Let's see. There. That is on a twill. This is on a cotton duck, and I believe it's a 7-ounce cotton duck. So I don't know if you can tell on the camera. If you can't, trust me that you're going to get a much crisper stitch out on a twill. So it's what I tend to use when I'm making things like this, or tote bags. I would use a heavier twill for a tote bag rather than cotton duck. Cotton duck isn't terrible, and depending on your design, it may be just fine. But when I've got text and things, I think it makes a nicer stitch out to use a twill. So here's a 7-ounce cotton duck with nothing on it. So this can kind of show you, hopefully show you the difference. The other thing with cotton duck, so you can get this stuff that's pretty heavy. The white that I have here is a 7-ounce. This, I think, is a 10-ounce, if my memory serves. And so it's going to stand up to a denser design a little better because it's heavier, but you're going to get more jaggies because the threads are bigger. And so the needle tends to want to go down, not through the thread, but beside the thread. And those little voids are farther apart in a heavier weight canvas. So again, my preference is twill when I can get it, when I can get the right color and the right weight that I want, for things that are tote bags, etc. All right, so that is my lecture on twill. You can tell I have strong feelings about twill. All right, here is my other favorite fabric, quilting cotton. Sorry, I'm going to look at I did notes this time so I wouldn't forget things. Okay, let's see. Wovens, denim is your friend. Got it. Okay. So, quilting cottons. And what I'm about to say kind of also goes for things like flour sack towels. Really do better with a lighter design. Can you do a denser design on them? You can, but you're going to have to do a lot more work and be a lot more careful with what you put in the hoop to make sure that you don't get a bunch of puckering. This is our Plague Doctor design. He's on a Sandy holder. I may throw, if people want this, I can throw this up there as just a separate design that you can use. This is meant to be a mask because we're back in the mask mandate here in Washington. So you can see that this has some density to it. And because this is a mask that's going to get washed at least once a week, because I like rotate through them for work and then throw them in laundry and they go in with the weekly laundry, I've used a cutaway stabilizer. And what I'll do is I'll cut that around the design so it's not too stiff and I'm wearing it on my face. And then my lining, I'll put another white up against the back or an off-white, and then we won't see that stabilizer line. I probably could have gotten away with a, come on, Kris, you're blanking out here. A no-show mesh. I probably could have gotten away with that with this, but this was handy and this is what I used. So this is an example of a design that's not too dense, but it needed a little extra stabilization because the fabric that it's on is so lightweight. All right, flour sack towels versus linen tea towels. You're going to be able to get away with more density on a heavier towel than you are on a lighter towel. Those wonderful flour sack towels that are all our grandmothers hand embroidered with, you know, wash on Monday or whatever, the things that I do maybe once a month so it doesn't apply. Those towels really need a light design, or they're going to pucker as soon as you start washing them, or you're going to have to use such a heavy stabilizer that it's going to kind of destroy the feel of the towel. One of the things you can do with lighter weight fabrics like a quilting cotton is you can interface them. New Moon Stitches, and unfortunately the owner there has passed away and they're closing down the business. They had a wonderful fusible woven interfacing that gave a lot of stability without, I'm going to see if I can find something like it and I'll post it in the comment or in the description here, and I'm also going to add it. We're going to add some materials links in the Facebook group. A nice fusible stabilizer fusible interfacing that doesn't get so crisp it gets stiff, but also gives support, can really help when you want to do something a little denser on one of these lightweight fabrics. Okay, knits. I'm going to talk about the nemesis that was this sweatshirt I made my friend. So this can be everything from t-shirt knits to sweatshirt knits. Again, the lighter and floppier the fabric, the softer the fabric, the lighter the design needs to be to have a good outcome. All right. So I bought a wonderful, I think it was like almost knee length or like a stadium length hoodie for my friend, and I wanted to put this really dense design on it. And again, this was before I digitized. I didn't know that I was going to enter the shit show I entered with this, but I fell in love with the style, ordered it, and because it was a garment, didn't have anything similar to test it on. The sweatshirt knit, this is the sleeve from one of the failures. So save your failures, especially if it's a fabric you haven't worked with a lot. Cut them up and keep them for when you get a new design you want to try in a similar fabric, then you can do a test sew on it. So this was a very expensive source of test sew material. So this is almost, it's a sweatshirt knit, but it's not stable. It's super soft and that feels wonderful, but it also means that it doesn't like the dense stitching. So I eventually got an okay outcome by using a fusible stabilizer that I fused to it to help keep the material from stretching in the hoop. And I think I floated it so that the hoop itself wouldn't cause this. I mean, you can see how stretchy this is. And it's an unusually soft sweatshirt fleece. It's super fleecy on the inside, and so it's just mushy. So I guess another way to talk about that is assess the squishiness of a fabric. As those stitches are going in, remember you're pushing thread into this fabric that when the fabric was made, that was not necessarily the intention, and so you're pushing this thread in and it's taking up space in there. That's what causes those puckers. This is so squishy up and down that even with a topper, it really sank into the fabric. So the squishier your fabric, and the thicker and squishier, the more you're going to have those stitches sinking. So you're going to want to assess the squishiness. How much compression happens when you squeeze down on this fabric? If they're super soft inside, like this is an amazingly soft, cozy fleece, that makes it squishier than the average sweatshirt fleece. It's also stretchier, right? And I didn't track this until I had the disaster happen. So with stuff like this, you're going to want to use a topper, and we'll talk about that more in a minute. But you're also going to want to float it, because if you try to hoop this, you're going to stretch it out of shape, and then when you pop it out of the hoop, boom, you have puckers. So you're going to want to float it, which generally is going to mean using adhesive to hold it onto the stabilizer or a basting box. I am afraid to use pins because I'm sure that I'm going to put a pin in the wrong place and my machine's going to, because it's a fucking Janome, it's going to go there because I put the pin there, because I think it kind of senses those sorts of things. So that's my recommendation on the knits. Alright, fabric with a nap. This would be things like fuzzy blankets, towels with like terry towels or waffle weave towels that have some dimension to them rather than tea towel. On these also you're going to want to use a topper. You're going to want to hold up those stitches so that they don't sink down into the terry, into the fleece, into the nap. Fleece jacket's another good example. And the kind of topper that you want to use is just something like this. This is a Floriani. This is what I got in the great, what was it, the great estate sale haul of 2018, I think. I got tons of stabilizer for almost nothing. So the saran wrap kind can be used as a topper. And there's also a version of this if you don't want to wash what you are creating for whatever reason. There's a heat away version of this that you can use on top. The other thing you can do is if you buy Embrilliance's, it's not in Essentials, I think it's in the second level. I don't know, I'm blanking on the name, I use it all the time. You can create a knockdown stitch. If I am making designs that I expect are going to end up on towels or blankets, I'm going to give you the knockdown design. I'm going to give you one version with the knockdown and one version without. A lot of digitizers do that, but you can also get Embrilliance software that will create the knockdown for you if you do a lot of that kind of work. That is just like a low density, very, very low density fill stitch that knocks that nap down and gives you a nice stable surface on which to put the actual embroidery design. Okay, same thing as with knits, towels, blankets. Don't try to hoop them, float them, right? If you have a basting box function on your machine, use it. Or if you have that in software and you can add a basting box and save it for your machine. That's your best approach there. I can't stress enough how saving your failures so you remember what went wrong and so you have more test material. And I can't stress enough to test stitch, especially if you're doing garments, because all garment material of a type, all sweatshirt fleece is not the same, right? All t-shirt knit is not the same. And although you can take these general kind of rules that I have given you today and make some pretty good guesses, there's nothing like a test stitch to show you where things are going to go wrong and when they're going to go right. So that's all I have for you on fabric. The next episode that I do, which I'm actually going to film today because I'm being proactive, is about working with vinyl, cork, those kinds of materials. And so I will be back in a flash, but it won't run until next week, to talk to you about those. So if you like this video, give me a thumbs up, subscribe, and check out the description box for our Facebook group. We have a lot of fun. That's also where you're going to get to hear about discounts and freebies and shop hops and all that good stuff. So until next week, which for me, because I'm filming it right after this, is going to be 5 minutes, bye-bye.